everybody, and welcome to another lesson of Lindsay Setchell's It's Not Rocket Science when it comes to understanding horse and hoof care. Sorry about the slightly echoey sound and the fact that the lighting isn't quite the same. I haven't got my mics. I'm in a different setup because it's Christmas and so I'm located in somebody else's house. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at a subject that we've had quite a lot of requests about, and that subject is this big loaded word, which is navicular. We're going to have a look at navicular today. We're going to look at what is navicular. What can we define navicular as? We're also going to look at who is affected by it. Does it affect all horses, or does it affect a certain cohort of equines in the domestic world? We're going to look at why navicular happens, what sort of things predispose that animal to getting navicular. We're going to look at diagnosis. Diagnosis. How do vets diagnose navicular? What can you do to observe your horse and start to see if there are any issues that you can pick up on that might indicate the early diagnosis of navicular, because early diagnosis is really, really important. And what about the treatment? How do horses get treated when they have navicular? And we're going to have a look at new thinking. We're going to look at a piece of research that has started to change the way that we're starting to think about navicular. And in fact, to be honest with you, it isn't that new. But when it comes to how we treat navicular and how we can stop navicular happening in the first place, this is something that really we need to be talking about, and vets need to be talking about, and scientists need to be talking about when it comes to the prevention of navicular. All right, so let's get into it. Let's get rid of my rocket. Let's just get rid of that. Okay, that loaded word, navicular. And the reason I say it's loaded is because as soon as an owner gets a diagnosis of navicular, it becomes terrifying, because they've only got to start Googling on the internet about treatment, about prognosis, and it starts to put the fear of God into them, because it's not a fantastic prognosis for many animals that are diagnosed with navicular. And that also depends on how they've been treated. So let's look at what navicular actually is. We're going to look at what. So I'm going to put up here how we're going to work through this. So what is navicular? Who gets navicular? Why does it happen? The diagnosis and the treatment. And then we'll have a look at the new thinking. So let's have that as our reminder up in the top right hand corner. So first and foremost, what is navicular? So let's draw our foot. Okay, here's our coronary band. Right here is P2. That's P2, and that's part way into the hoof capsule. Then we have P3. Here's P3 coming in here. These are the palmar processes, and I'm going to just leave it like that for a moment. And then right here, we have the navicular bone, located just here. And the navicular bone is one of three bones in this whole joint here, which is the distal interphalangeal joint, otherwise known as the coffin joint, which is easier to remember than distal interphalangeal joint. So it's the coffin joint, and there are three bones in the coffin joint: P2, P3, and the navicular bone. So what happens? Well, we have what we call a deep digital flexor tendon, which many of you will have heard of. And this deep digital flexor tendon runs down the back of the horse's foot. I'm sorry that my diagrams aren't very good. Oh God. And it has an angle of insertion. Could have been a bit lower actually, that's not so great. But you get the idea. The DDFT is coming down, and here's the navicular bone. And it runs over the navicular bone as it changes direction and then inserts into P3. And it's this area here, plus some of the little ligaments that attach the navicular bone to P2 and to P3, and plus there's a bunch of other ligaments in there. Remember, there are no muscles in this foot. Unlike the human foot, there are no muscles, but there are tendons, there are ligaments, and there are 3 bones. So this is how the foot looks. We have the DDFT, we have a big digital cushion down here, we have P3, we have P2, and we have the navicular bone. So what is navicular? Well, it's considered progressive. I say considered progressive because we're going to talk about a little bit in a minute about how we can consider it as being rehabilitated too. So it's considered a progressive disease. It's sometimes known as, I think we'll put it up here, it's sometimes called a disease. You'll hear it called a syndrome. You'll hear it called caudal heel pain, or palmar heel pain. These are all the terms that have been used over the years, and these all tend to be kind of synonymous with each other, depending on who you talk to. But what we do know is it's something to do with this in here, and focus has very much been on lesions. So looking for lesions in the foot. But the trouble with that, there are situations when some horses have lesions and are not really that lame, and in some instances not lame at all. And there are other situations where there are other horses that don't appear to have so much in the way of lesions, and yet they're very lame. So we know that it's progressive. We know that it can have lesions. We also know that it can have bone remodeling. So you have bone remodeling. So you can have what they call synovial invagination. So this is where you have what they have termed in the past lollipops. These are what they're looking for in the navicular bone. They're looking for these holes that get bigger and that they can almost look like teeth as the bone gets remodeled. So we know that it's progressive. We know that there may or may not be lesions involved. We know that there may or may not be bone remodeling involved. And we also know that there is pain generated for the horse towards the back of the foot. Hence why it's called caudal or palmar heel pain. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. All right, so let's move on. So that's what navicular is. So let's just take all this away, and we'll just leave that on there for the moment. So we've looked at what it is, so let's give that a big tick. Now we're going to look at who is affected. So this is interesting, and this is really worth really thinking about, because the equines that are usually affected with navicular tend to be equines like warm bloods or thoroughbreds or quarter horses, horses that tend to be sport horses. These are animals that tend to be affected by navicular. It doesn't tend to affect ponies. And yet ponies in some instances can be doing a great deal of work, yet it doesn't seem to affect them like it does the warm bloods, the thoroughbreds, the quarter horses, the big sport horses. These are the ones that navicular seems to affect. And this is something that's really worth exploring. And we're going to do that now when it comes to the why. So now we know we know the who, and now we're going to look at why. So there are various reasons why these particular animals, and not the ponies, and somebody might come forward and go, well, my pony's been diagnosed, but these are very small cases if ponies get diagnosed with navicular. The majority are these kind of horses. So why? Why are these kind of horses being diagnosed? Well, it's a lot to do with their workload. It's to do with the type of movement. It's to do also with the way these horses are ridden. And that can involve tack, the sort of tack that is used. It can involve the way that the rider is positioned. and also posture. Now, these two things here aren't really spoken about an awful lot. We talk about the workload, we talk about the movement, but rarely do we talk about the ridden aspect of it and how that can affect these horses, and the posture and how that can affect these horses. And by posture, I'm talking about things like false collection. And if you want me to do a lesson on false collection, I'll be more than happy to do so, as opposed to correct collection for the horse. So posture. But there are other things involved too. How the horse has been shod, how the horse has been trimmed, and both of those might actually go together. Shod and trimmed, because they've got to be trimmed before they're shod. It's how they're shod, how they're trimmed. So basically the hoof care also has an effect. And something else. Laminitis is something that is also part of it and rarely spoken about. And the reason that we talk about laminitis is because that affects the health of that foot, and also it affects how the horse is shod, how the horse is trimmed, and the fact that there are many horses up here in this area here, these warm blood thoroughbreds, quarter horses, sport horses, that are being ridden when they have real true pathology in their feet. So they've got thrush at the back of the foot, which is causing them to have heel pain. So it affects the way that they walk. So these are all the things that can affect why the horse is predisposed to navicular. And these horses, of course, are put under an awful lot more strain and stress because of the sports that they do compared to ponies. Now, a lot of ponies do a lot of different sports, but it tends to be these horses that are put under this specific kind of stress because of the workload that they do. So now we're going to look at how we diagnose. So let's get rid of all of this. So this is the diagnosis side of it. Now, I'm not a vet, so I'm not going to go out and diagnose your horse's navicular, but what we can do as owners is observe, right? We can see, oops, hello, what was I doing there? We can see, we can look at the horse, and we can visualize what's happening. We can start to really understand lameness. So many owners don't understand lameness. They can't pick it up when a horse is going lame. Neither can many pros. They don't pick up that subtle lameness. Now, one of the reasons that they don't with navicular is because it can be bilateral. Now, that means in both feet, both the left fore and the right fore. Now, here's something else. Why is navicular, why does it tend to be in the front feet and not in the back feet? Sure, we've got navicular bones in the back feet. All of this that I've drawn here for you now is the same whether it's in the front foot or the back foot. Yet horses don't tend to get navicular in their hind feet. Why? Well, could it be the way that this foot is being shod, being trimmed, the way that the posture is being affected, the way the horse is being ridden? Is it being ridden on the forehand? Is it being ridden through that false collection, so it's not collecting itself properly from behind, it's not driving through from behind, everything's on the forehand? We have so many issues that mean that the horse's front feet are more susceptible to navicular. And plus, with the front feet, something else can happen. When a horse gets thrush in the back of here, they get thrush, it's incredibly painful. And one of the things that many people say to me is, when my horse is footsore, it's because he's got thin soles. Do you know something? I would absolutely guarantee to you that over 90% of horses that are footsore are not footsore because of their thinness of their soles or because it's their soles that are hurting. No, they're footsore because of the sensitivity at the back of the foot, the sensitivity of the frog, and the fact that the frog can be contracted, it can be atrophied. It doesn't have a lot of strength in that and the digital cushion because of the way that that horse has been kept, the hoof care over the years, the fact that the back of this foot isn't mature as that horse grows, because of various factors that happen to the horse before it's allowed to mature properly. All of these things cause the frog to be hypersensitive at the back, because thrush, being one big thing with the contraction, causes a lot of pain. And when that horse goes to put his foot down, it hurts. And specifically down here, let's just remove this a minute, where we have, where we have the digital cushion, which is this big fatty area that's located underneath the frog at the back of the foot. We know that it has special receptors, and those receptors are located in high abundance around the navicular area. So when that horse walks and this P2 begins to come down as the whole the whole distal limb starts to articulate and the fetlock comes down, pressure is put here on the navicular bone, which in turn puts pressure on the DDFT. That's how it works. And this area here in the digital cushion, this fatty area, is there to protect this part of the foot. And it's there to protect and to dissipate energy. They used to think that the digital cushion was just a shock absorber. Well, actually, research into cows has now shown us that the digital cushion is better at dissipating the energy because of the very specific way that the digital cushion tissue is made. It's fibrofatty, fibrocartilage, and the way that that is distributed means it dissipates energy rather than absorbs energy. And they know this now, and it's dissipating. We've got ground forces coming up and we've got the force coming down, and that's why we have this fatty area here. So this sensitivity means that horses actually start to load the toe. They start to toe walk, and they start to try desperately not to load this back of the foot because the back of the foot is hurting, so they don't want to load it. They have pain coming out of the back of the foot, and this is the typical footsore horse where pain is happening in the back. But you know something, oftentimes with these horses, I've rubbed it out, haven't I? The warm bloods, the thoroughbreds, the quarter horses, these sorts of horses are often put in shoes where we don't necessarily see this issue straight away. And so if the horse wasn't in shoes, we'd pick up this footiness quicker, faster. We'd see it. It would be more obvious. But because these horses are put in shoes, they don't pick that part of it up. So that's one great big part of the observation that some owners can't see because the horse has been put in shoes. So left fore and right fore, it can be bilateral. So that often means that an owner's really got used to the fact that the horse is short striding, it's got a choppy stride, it's not really performing properly, but because it's been so insidious, because it's happened over a long period of time, the owner hasn't really even noticed it. And sometimes when a horse goes in and has nerve blocks on one foot because they go, I think that it's got lameness in its left fore, so it goes to have its diagnosis at the vets, and they go to observe it. They want to see it trot up, they want to see it on different surfaces, they want to see it go in a circle, and they'll go, oh yeah, we think you've got left fore lameness. So what we're going to do is we're going to put some nerve blocks in here that's going to stop the information getting up to the brain from down here. Ideally, what that's going to do means that the horse will then go sound. And when they do that, sometimes what they find is they go, oh, oops, it's actually lame on its right fore too. But we couldn't see that before because the left fore was more lame than the right fore. So lameness identification is so important, and it's so often missed. So that's part of the diagnosis, and that's that observation. Another part of diagnosis now, which has really pushed forward understanding this area of the foot, is imaging. And by that we mean things like MRI. This is what we want to be using when we're looking at all these structures and the effects on these structures. So MRI imaging has really pushed forward the understanding of the failure of what's going on here. And nowadays, and this is a really big word, and I'm going to have to just rub out Navicular to put it up here. Nowadays, it's actually considered, this whole system is called the podotrochlea trochlear apparatus. And that means apparatus. I had to think about that. Oh yeah, there it is. That's it, apparatus, podotrochlear apparatus. And that's what they are now calling all of this. This is the podotrochlear apparatus, and it can get podotrochleitis. So it can get inflammation of the podotrochlear apparatus. So we've before with navicular, we've really concentrated on various things, the problems with the navicular bone, the problems with the ligaments, the tendons, and all the treatment, which we're going to talk about in a sec, has been directed at that. But actual fact, when we start looking at the imaging and the MRI, we can blow that out now, and we're starting to look at more things in this foot. All right, so let's now have a look at the treatment. So this is the, so we've done diagnosis, so now we're looking at treatment. How do they treat it? Well, this can vary from remedial shoeing. So they can have remedial shoeing, remedial trimming, and that often involves putting in a wedge at the back of the foot. Because they're aware that the back of the foot has got problems, it's pretty sore, it's got caudal heel pain, so if they wedge up the back, therefore it's going to give that horse some relief. And indeed, in some cases, it does. We can also use drugs. So there are various drugs that can be used, and these are focusing on various things. They're focusing on the bone, so it can be bone remodeling, they're focusing on inflammation, or they're focusing on the vascular system. They're looking at various things that they can target drugs to do to try and help pain management and to try and help that horse continue to have a normal life. Another thing that happens is they tend to have box rest, or they tend to have very limited exercise. These are other ways of treating navicular. So it's a combination of looking at the hoof care, giving the horse pain management, and hopefully drugs that might stop some of this, perhaps keeping the horse rested, then giving it limited exercise and very targeted exercise. And those are the sorts of things that we can use for treatment. However, the success rate for all of that, still to this day with navicular, is very poor. Now we know that because there have now been systematic reviews of papers of research that was done for navicular. And one of these systematic reviews was done by Osborne et al. So Osborne et al. That just means Osborne and the other researchers that were part of it. And 2021, they were looking at all of these papers that had been produced all about navicular. And it was very based on this kind of stuff, on what we can do to try and rehab the horse, and the fact that there was very little success going forward in the long term. So Osborne et al. Then went and started to look at some comparative studies between the horse and the human. Now, of course, we have to be careful here, don't we? Because the human foot isn't the same as the horse foot. And the way that the human walks as a biped isn't the same as a horse who's a quadruped. But there are some things that are very, very similar. And we're going to talk about those right now. And this is what Osborne et al. Were looking at, centering their thoughts on something called the enthesis. Now, the enthesis, if we look down here, is this area here. This is the area where the DDFT actually attaches itself to bone. Now, I don't know whether anybody's ever thought about this, but you have your tendon, and then you have your bone, and it has to attach to that. But along the way, this begins to change, and it starts to change into something that becomes more fibrous. Oops, hello. And they've got connective tissue is involved. oops, hello, connective, yeah, tissue is involved, it changes. That tendon changes, and it changes on the micro level, not on the macro level. So if you're looking at it, you cut a horse's foot in half, you see the tendon, you see the bone, and you see the attachment. But this is not what they're talking about. They're talking about looking at it on a micro level. And this is the enthesis, the way that this tendon is attached to this bone. Now, it's not unique to the horse's foot. It happens to us that when tendons attach to bone, they know that it has a specific way of attaching, and the tendon changes. It changes until it becomes bone. And that's what enables the tendon to remain attached, which doesn't rip off the bone, because it actually changes and morphs itself into bone eventually. And that is known as the enthesis. Now, what Osborne et al. Looked at, they were looking at the human foot. They were looking, let's see if we can appallingly draw the human foot. So here we have the human foot. Oh God, sorry about this. Oh, there's my toe. There's a bit of a toenail sticking up a little bit there. And in the human foot, we have a bone which is called the calcaneus. Horses have one too, and that is in their hock, in their hind legs. They also have a calcaneus. And this calcaneus is attached in the foot, and here we've got the tibia and the fibula, and then we've got the toe bones. And this here, the way that the way that the human walks, is because they have a tendon that comes down the back here and locates itself into the back of this calcaneus. And that is called, yes, you've remembered it, it is the Achilles tendon. Now, if you've ever torn your Achilles tendon, you'll know that how that affects the way you move and how painful it is. So what Osborne et al. Did is they were saying, okay, let's have a look at the enthesis, that's the attachment of the Achilles tendon in the back of the calcaneus, and also the enthesis, the attachment of the DDFT. And they found similarities. They were similar. They also found that in the progression of the problems that happen with the Achilles tendon in humans, that the issues were similar. That the way that the lesions occurred, where they occurred, all looked very, very similar. And so they started looking at who gets these kinds of problems. And again, you're in the world often of sport and how this can affect the Achilles tendon. Now, there's an awful lot of money in human sport, so there's been quite a bit of research and looking into how they can prevent this happening in humans. And they know that it's something that we now use a word called prehab rather than rehab, which is preventative. What can we do to prevent these injuries, these sports injuries happening to humans? Well, in the prehab world, in the preventative world, it's all about managing posture. It's all about managing how they work, how they perform, what their footwear is, how they run, how they do their sport. So this is all about prehab now with humans, and they know rather than let the Achilles damage happen to the tendons and the ligaments, etc. in the foot, let's see how we can stop it first before it actually happens. And there's been great success. And that's what Osborne et al. Were looking at, because it's so similar, these issues. So they said that in actual fact, the whole of this, everything that you see here and more, all the soft tissues, the digital cushion, the frog, the P3, P2, all the ligaments, the tendons, everything in here is known as the enthesis organ. That is what they're calling it, the enthesis organ. And when you look at navicular, you mustn't just look here, or just here, or just here, or at the ligaments. That's not what we should be doing. We should be seeing this as an entire organ. The podotrochlear apparatus is an entire organ, and anything, any part of that organ, any part of that tissue that gets affected anywhere affects other parts of the whole organ. And this really shouldn't be rocket science, should it really? It really should not be rocket science. We have to kind of stop looking at specifics and blow it up more and look at the whole thing and why that whole thing is being affected and what we can do to stop that whole thing from failing. Because it isn't just partly to do with the thrush. It isn't just partly to do with contraction or pain here, but also we've got posture, how the horse is holding himself, how the horse is being ridden, like we said earlier. The rider has a huge impact on it, how the horse is being shod, how the horse is being trimmed. All of these things affect it. If you've got a horse that's going lame and is diagnosed with navicular, you have to look at all of these things, all of them. And also, there's something else too, the way the horse is kept and fed, diet and management. Now, how do we know that all that has an effect too? Because we have taken countless numbers of horses who have been diagnosed with navicular and we've gone, right, shoes off, a natural trim, get the foot into the natural shape. Let's start giving it the right diet so that it can start curing those awful problems with thrush and pain in the back of the foot. Let's give it the right management, lots of movement naturally, that the horse does itself without, the only time that it gets moved is it lives in a box, and the only time it has movement is when it's ridden or it's being controlled by a human. That's no good at all. The horse needs to do its own movement. Then it will have better posture. And then, in fact, when you do that, the horse doesn't need to be shod. It can be kept trimmed very naturally. And when we do this to these horses, as long as there hasn't been a huge amount of intervention, and that can also, folks, include surgery, because with the severe cases, they use surgery too, and that can be anything to do with cutting tendons, not just down here, further up. It can cause they can use all sorts of things, but once you start having intervention, that's when it becomes difficult. That's when the pathway back to health becomes more of a problem. That pathway is where we're trying to get. We're trying to get to health. But in actual fact, what happens to most horses that are diagnosed is the pathway just carries on through to disease. They go that way instead of that way. And our job is to take them that way. And how we do that is it starts with the diet and the management. It starts with taking the shoes off. It starts with trimming them correctly to Mother Nature's blueprint. It then is all about posture, riding, tack, false collection, helping that owner understand that the reason that horse has got navicular isn't just because they're unlucky, because it was just that horse that got it. No. It was because there were a bunch of things that predisposed that horse into getting that problem. And when that horse starts toe walking, this DDFT on a foot that actually isn't natural either, this horse starts to cause more problems for itself. It's one of those self-perpetuating things. The more pain it gets in the back of the foot, the more it starts to toe walk. The more it starts to toe walk, the more this starts to have issues and inflammation. This is where we get lesions, where the DDFT can attach to the navicular bone. It can also have lesions with other ligaments. All of this happens because the horse is trying not to load the back of the foot, so it just gets worse and worse and worse. Then we get the treatment coming in, then we get all sorts of issues and situations where we just don't have the success that you think there might be. It isn't. When Osborne et al. And others have done these systematic reviews, they've gone back in time and gone, you know what, we've been doing all this stuff to the horse's foot, all these things that we've been doing to try and cure navicular, and we're not curing it at all. It keeps on happening. So we need to look at how we deal with a similar situation in humans, and we do it to be preventative. We understand more about posture, we understand more about training, we understand more about the athlete, because those Warm bloods, thoroughbreds, quarter horses, sport horses, these are the athletes. And this is why it tends to happen to those rather than the ponies, because the ponies, many ponies in history weren't even shod because it was like, oh, well, we don't need to shoe a pony. But these horses tend to have, these thoroughbreds, these sport horses, these warm bloods, these quarter horses tend to have these problems because of the way that they're ridden, because of the workload, because of the tack, because of the diet and management, because they tend to be kept differently to ponies oftentimes. This is a whole problem. It isn't to do with just one single thing. And therefore, in the future, as we move into the future with these equines, we have to look at this in terms of it being an organ, the enthesis organ, how it's attached, why that happens similarly in humans. And therefore, then, we can start to understand navicular far better. It isn't just one of those things that your horse has got. No, it isn't. It's been caused by the way that we have intervened with this animal. If you leave them to be more natural, more species specific, and I'm not saying you can't ride them, that's silly, of course you can, but we've got equine athletes competing with their owners who are barefoot and doing amazingly well. You've only got to look into the racing industry to find that there are fewer tendon issues, fewer soft tissue issues when the horses are kept barefoot and kept more naturally. Just look at Peder Fredriksson and Henrik von Eckermann. You've only got to look at the Swedish Olympic team going barefoot, winning, and actually having less problems than other sports horses. Okay, so I hope that's helped. It's been a fairly long lesson, but it's a huge subject and there's so much more to go into than what I've covered, but these are the basics of what you need to know. So if you have a horse that's diagnosed with navicular, the very first thing you need to think about is all of these things here. Don't just rely on those drugs. Don't just rely on those shoes that are going to wedge up your horse. Don't rely on that. What you have to start thinking about is what caused it in the first place, because it is all of this. Actual true navicular, which is the true disease which happens just because, is incredibly rare. These horses that are diagnosed today with navicular, it's all because of this. So, prevent navicular, keep your horses more species specific, and you can learn how on one of our workshops or our online courses. And our workshops of 2024 are being, we've released the dates, so check the link below. We're going to Norfolk, we're going to Aylesbury, we're going to Cheshire, we're going to Somerset, and we are then going to go north towards the end of the year, but we haven't got those dates yet. 3 days where you're going to learn incredible things about your horse. Even if you think you don't need to know, you need to know. So come along. 3 days, it's going to blow your mind. You will be absolutely staggered at the information that you learn in 3 days, and you will be able to go away and help your horse remain sound and barefoot going forward to future-proof your horse's soundness and health. Well, I hope I see you on those 3 days. For those of you who are international, don't worry, our online courses are going to be released soon. You need to know this stuff as an owner. Maybe not all the fine detail, but you need to know it. I hope it's helped. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.